Hey, this is John. Let's Talk Native is now on Patreon. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. We will be producing exclusive content for our Patreon supporters. Thanks for checking us out.
Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. We highlight the voices of Native activists, writers, poets, artists, thinkers, and musicians who are fighting for the rights of indigenous people all over Turtle Island. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. In this moment of historical change and social justice, our voices matter now more than ever before. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
So there you go, this is John Kane. Hey, thanks for joining us here. You know, I keep hearing voices from different segments of American society and, people of color in particular, that they keep offering that same old line that we're all in this together. And are we? I mean, are we really all in this together? As I look at any part of, whether you're just talking about this crazy year that is 2020 or just in general, historically, have we really all been in this together? Look, I know we're all sharing the same planet. We're just not getting the same share of the planet. So as I think about this concept, I'm thinking, no, we aren't. We are not all in this together, because many of us have been trampled on by others for centuries. So when I hear a Native person or a Black person or a white person who is trying to be an ally to social justice issues, and they say we're all in this together, it's kind of like the all lives matter thing. No, that's not the way it plays out. It is not enough. Look, let's put it this way. If we have to deal with social justice and racial equity, then clearly we aren't all in this together. Some of us are on the bottom and others are on the top. And it's not like the people on the bottom are the ones making decisions. We're not deciding to be at the bottom. We are, we're trying to not just survive, because many of us are tired of just eking out an existence. We want more, and we don't want it from somebody else. We just want everybody else to stop putting the brakes on us. So, look, even as we talk about COVID, there's no question that people of color are being affected disproportionately by this. Now, is it because we are somehow fragile? No. It's because of the systems that are out there. There's no doubt that systemic racism exists. You see it across all segments of or any metric you want to measure: prison population, poverty, health, life expectancy, mother mortality at childbirth. All of this. If you measure any of those things, and you're going to see people of color that are disproportionately damaged, or that we lock in the lowest spots on any of those charts. And as a Native person, I'm sorry, when I hear people say, well, the way that we make change is that we vote in their elections. I'm not going to belabor that point anymore. I've talked about that enough in the run up to this latest debacle. But even as I hear interviews of Deborah Haaland and Sharice David and how great it is that they are in the positions that they're in, they had to leave our people to join that system to do anything. And then look, they're not all in this together. We hold all of the spaces that nobody else wants to hold. So I want to talk about this. I want to elaborate a little bit about not only all of the disparities, but the fact is that even as we challenge these things that are set against us, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's social justice issues, whether it's poverty, we are not at a level. We are in a level playing field, and I'm not saying this because, I mean, I hear that same argument put back on us. Put it that way, because we perhaps don't pay as much taxes on native territory as they do off territory. That we have some sort of disproportionate advantage. But see, that's because everything else is not being measured out. So I guess to talk about the disparity that exists, and look, I could do a whole show on what Black people and some of the immigrant populations have gone through. But this is Let's Talk Native. So I'm going to talk about some of the real circumstances, the real policies that exist. Even as we think about things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. For one thing, that document, which has no teeth whatsoever, it's an aspirational document, as they call it, right? It is the minimum standard for dignity and survival. The minimum. And most countries, especially, affluent countries like the United States and Canada, they can't even meet the minimum standard. It's not because they can't afford to. It's because it disrupts their own narrative about who we are as Native people in the context of these colonial powers. We continue to be a black eye to the colonizers, and that's why there is so very little in terms of concessions that are not just given. But when I talk about concessions, I'm not asking for anything. I just mean concede to us that we have our right to distinction. So again, not asking for gifts. I'm not even talking about reparations. That we can have that conversation, because clearly we have suffered losses. We have suffered significant losses in terms of land and our ability to sustain ourselves. Look, we weren't an impoverished people. When white people washed up on our shores, they saw nothing but poverty and destitution. Do you think that they would have come over in droves the way they did? Of course not. They saw a people living comfortable lives, a land that seemed to produce a bounty to sustain life. It didn't do it all by itself. We had to help it along. But so when I hear people talk about this concept, this idea, oh yeah, we're all in this together, and we need to all support each other. That support's not even. I appreciate the fact that there are times that people have stepped up with other oppressed people to help, but it doesn't make them oppressed people necessarily. Look, sometimes Black people and Native people have joined together, but we aren't always fighting for the same thing. So we aren't all in this, and I guess it depends on how you define this. We aren't all in this together, because if we as Native people are not trying to become or fight for equal rights protections under the U.S. Constitution, if we're still out there saying, yeah, that's not our Constitution, and the fact that you've tried to subjugate us under that document is still something that's problematic. Look, I've talked about the voting issue. I've talked about representation. I've talked about all of this stuff before. Even the fact that our own people feel like we've got to hire white people to be our mouthpieces for us. Part of that is because we kind of accept, to some extent, how rigged the system is. So what do? We try to play that game, a game that was never designed for us. And so no matter what we do, we are playing that game at a disadvantage. Because look, it doesn't matter how many lobbyists we hire. It doesn't matter how many campaign contributions we make. You think if you added all native dollars together that have gone into this racket that people call lobbying and campaign contributions, we don't even scratch the surface compared to the oil industry. I mean, these industries that are destroying the planet, they've got way more money to spend. So I don't even know why we even try that. But I've heard people say it for most of my adult life. I've heard people say, well, you need to put some money together and spend a couple $1 million on lobbying. I've been listening to that since I was in my 20s. And it pissed me off when I was in my 20s. And I'm still pissed off because now we're actually doing it. We're actually spending the millions of dollars on these lobbyists. So what does that money get us? Nothing. And even as we have native people that run for offices and actually win a couple of elections, yeah, look, for one thing, I'm not taking anything away from Sharice David and Deborah Holland for not only winning an election but being reelected. But they're not the first. They're the first women, native women, but they're not the first native people. I've mentioned it before. Look, there's two other Republican congressmen from Oklahoma, and they aren't there fighting for native rights, even though they're native. I've mentioned it before. There was actually a native vice president of the United States, Charles Curtis, under Herbert Hoover. And he sucked. This is not a play on Hoover, by the way. But no, he was terrible. Under his time as both a congressman and then a U.S. senator and as a vice president, there was some of the largest losses of native lands that took place historically, especially in the areas of Oklahoma and the 5 civilized tribes. But Charles Curtis was terrible for native policy and for native peoples and native distinction. He was an assimilationist, and look, he didn't deny being native, but he really did conform with being non-native. He was pretty good at white passing if he tried. But he was not a good politician in that system. He did not play that game to help us. He played that game to help himself. Now, and I'm not saying that every native person who enters into the U.S. political system is only trying to advance themselves. But they have to essentially submit to that system. And that system does not accommodate. I mean, again, let me be clear here. Social justice is not a numbers game. If you're just gonna say, okay, well, in order to get justice, we need to have, more participation. We need to have more people involved. We need to have more money involved and all that other stuff. That's not the way it works. The reason you have injustice is because the numbers stack up against oppressed people. And it's not always stacked up against oppressed people because there aren't enough of us. I mean, look at African apartheid. I mean, look at the situation there. Look in South America. It is still white people in many of those South American countries that are the bastions of power in those countries. And if they aren't, they usually have the backing of the United States to help do a coup to make sure that it is. The people, the black and brown people of these countries, they don't have people in positions of power that look like them. And in the United States, I don't want a native president of the United States. No, I don't. I mean, or vice president of the United States. That does not solve a goal for me, because that means that person. I remember listening to Barack Obama give his eulogy speech, if you want to call it that, to Nelson Mandela. And he talked about how grateful he is that the United States, allowed him and his family to rise, to break those glass ceilings, as they call them, right? And to live the life that they live. But you know what? Things didn't improve dramatically for black people when Barack Obama was the president. So good for Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and his kids. Good for them. But you know what? we aren't all in this together. They weren't in it to help everybody, the most oppressed people. And look, there are scholars, philosophers, there are, legal experts who made it clear that you judge the character of a country by how the most oppressed people are treated. You don't judge it by how wealthy the wealthy can be. And if you make it a numbers game, if you just, talk about average income or average unemployment or average this or average that, you have people on the top that disproportionately skew those numbers that make the people at the bottom invisible. When you've got, over half the, 50% of the United States wealth concentrated in about 1% of the population, when you have that level of disparity in terms of, poverty and wealth and income, you can ignore the people that are on the bottom. And in fact, you ignore them when it comes to equity, but you don't ignore them when it comes to, how you're going to play to their fears when it comes to to win an election, or how you're going to, rally these people who will literally vote against their own self-interest because they can identify with, a white supremacist, let's say. I mean, there are Native people who supported Donald Trump. I know we can get into into all those numbers, but the fact that there's any black people who would support somebody who has clearly demonstrated such racial bias, I mean, it just kind of goes to show you where people, how people can rationalize what their next steps are going to be. So the reason I wanted to address this topic the way I wanted to address it is because we have to understand that we aren't all the same. And we aren't all the same. And this isn't about, God created all men equal. It's not about that. We are all the same because history has not treated us the same. Power has not treated us the same. And look, there's no question that if you go from region to region, the earth itself can be a large contributor to the wealth of a people. And I don't mean just because of oil or gold being discovered and that kind of stuff. Just how plentiful the earth is in terms of nutrition and that kind of thing. So we understand that. But when you look at a country like the United States, where the rest of the world thinks that it's just this tremendously affluent territory. I was just listening to a story today about people in Alabama who have had a resurgence in hookworm. You know where hookworm comes from? It's from sewage running on the ground outside their houses. And this is something that shouldn't be a problem. And what the expert said is, we don't usually see this in developed countries. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you that there's large segments of the population within North America that are living in third world conditions. So again, don't tell me we're all in this together, because we aren't. I once saw this cartoon, and it always recycles around this time of year because of the Thanksgiving holiday, and it shows all these people eating this lavish dinner, and it's like a crosscut of the earth. Below their feet, below their floorboards, and are just the bones of Native people that these people are just eating over the top of. And to me, that captures a little bit about how affluence works. You literally cannot have the extreme levels of wealth in the United States without having taken food out of somebody else's mouth, without having exploited people, to the point of, not just slavery, but poverty, unlivable wages. I mean, you can't reach that level. I mean, and I think about everything from, the guy who's desperate to hang on to his doorman's position in New York City on the Upper East Side, or these jobs that people can almost be invisible in. And why? It's because we aren't all in this together. There are many people who are carrying the wealth for other people. They are providing that wealth. And they do. And look, I talk about voting with our dollars. We the things that we purchase, the wages that we're willing to work for because jobs are scarce. I mean, we do this stuff in many ways. We conduct ourselves in a way that where we contribute to our own poverty. We're also seeing all the stuff that's advertised to us, and we cling to these things that we think are so important to us, whether it's the latest electronic gadget or the car or whatever it is, the clothes, the brands. I mean, it's amazing to me when I think about how people who don't have the money to spend will still spend the money on these small pieces of affluence that they can grab onto. And look, and I'm not blaming them. I'm not blaming them because I get it. I mean, it's like when I hear people say, well, that woman's on welfare. Look, she's got her nails done. Really? So you think the problem is that she got her nails done rather than what? Worked? I mean, or the same thing I'll hear about, food stamps or SNAP benefits. They'll condemn somebody for having even the slightest bit of luxury to their life. Like, no, damn it! If you're going to be on SNAP, you have to look poor, you have to act poor, you have to be poor. I mean, when they were doing these stimulus checks, and they added a few extra dollars to unemployment benefits, and it wasn't just a few. I mean, it was $600. The wealthy people in Washington were so concerned that some people would be actually making more money not working than when they worked. But you know what? That's kind of the way averages work, folks. Because when you look at the mean income in the United States, that's not what people are making, because that's been skewed so much again by that 1%. So don't tell me that because some people having an extra $600 added to their unemployment benefits, that somehow that's going to screw up the social contract? Are you freaking kidding me? And the worst part about it is any of these benefits, whether it was a stimulus check or whether it's supplemental unemployment insurance or SNAP benefits or whatever, that goes right back. There are people who get wealthy off of that stuff. Because we spend all that money right back in. And I say we, I mean collectively, just people in general. I mean, it gets spent right back in. So the corporations, they get a double bonus. Because to be clear, the first stimulus checks or the bill there, or I can't remember what they called it. But anyway, the first act that they passed that was supposed to, the CARES Act, that's what it was. The majority of that money went to corporations right off the bat. I mean the overwhelming majority. I mean, everybody says, $1,200 to every person. That was a drop in a bucket compared to what the industry's got. So they get that right out of the gate. And of course, then there's also, not just low interest, but loans that could turn into grants if they did certain things. So they threw all this money. I mean, trillions of dollars, all this money, and most of it went to corporations. And then the money that went to the individuals, that ultimately went back to the corporations too. So when I hear people, these politicians get up on during the news cycles talking about how this has to be done to help the people, they don't ever talk to you, because it was the Democrats that were responsible for a lot of that money going to corporations. It wasn't just the Republicans. Everybody thinks that that these are such polar opposites. Nah, they aren't. The disproportionate amount of aid that went because of this COVID-19 thing went to corporations in the beginning, and then ultimately it all goes back to the corporations. Because where the hell are we going to spend money on? Where are we going to spend it? Walmart? Yeah, there you go. And so this is kind of the craziness, and that's why when I hear people on the radio or on television or in any of the internet feeds, the social networking, all of that stuff, and I hear somebody who doesn't live like me tell me that we're all in this together. It's, in a way, it's almost like saying, "Suck it up, we're all with you." No, you've got chauffeurs driving you around. There are many of us who, for one thing, part of the reason that people of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, it's because where we sit in this "we are all together" thing, right? We're at the bottom. We still have to go to work. We get considered, these essential employees. Why? Because we're serving other people. Because we are on the lowest level of the service industry, and we can't afford to not take care of our kids and have have our income affected. And of course, when they do these benefits, they're one shot deals. I mean, unemployment insurance has run out. What are they saying? I think they're saying the day after Christmas, a whole lot of people are going to find themselves in a world of hurt. Merry Christmas. God bless America, right? Yeah, why? Because those people don't care, because we are not all in it together. There are many of us that have to carry a much bigger burden. Just to survive. I mean, again, when I think about the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it says that these articles represent the minimum standard for dignity and survival. Well, I got to tell you, I don't know where the dignity comes in. And survival, I mean, all it means is that we aren't dying at the rate we were dying before. But trust me, we are still dying. We have the highest suicide rates. We have the highest substance abuse rates. We have the highest mortality rates for infant mortality and for mothers giving birth. We are dying. They aren't massacring us in the way that they did in Wounded Knee or Sand Creek or other places. But we're still dying because we are not all in it together. Some of us are on the bottom, being trampled every single day. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break, and we'll come right back. I want to go a little farther. So let me get into a little bit more details. I also want to talk about an event that's coming up, and I'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, before I get back into it, there is an event that's coming up on Saturday, November 28th. It is a virtual concert, and it's got some of the best Native performers I'm aware of. Jimmy Wolf, who's one of my favorites, is the one who sent me the link and the flyer for it. I've got it posted up on my Facebook group pages. In fact, I shared it across a bunch of them. So it's a virtual concert. So you're going to be able to watch this either through Facebook Live, or I think they're even going to put up some Zoom information so you can follow it through Zoom. Now, the Akwesasne Freedom School, they have a Facebook page, and it'll be streaming on their page. I'll also update any other information I get on this thing. But this thing is running from 11 o'clock in the morning to 7 p.m. So this is an all-day thing, and you can get in there and check it out. And, of course, if it's a live stream, you'll be able to watch it later on, too. But I got to assume they're trying to do some sort of fundraising for the Akwesasne Freedom School. So although it's not real clear to me exactly how. It is a free event. So check it out. Again, it's Saturday, November 28th, and it starts at 11 a.m. And it runs all the way through. I think the last performer will perform at 6:30, so it's going to run for another half hour beyond that. So check it out. And again, you don't want to miss Jimmy Wolf. I mean, he's one of my favorites. I've got a chance to do he's joined me on my show a few times, even in New York and on Let's Talk Native. We've connected up at the Native American Music Awards and a couple of other concert events that he's done. So it's love to watch him play. Love to hear him. He is a really incredible blues artist. So anyway, check it out. Again, Saturday, November 28th, from 11 a.m. to probably 7 p.m. And again, as I was saying before the break, I can give example after example after example where the lack of parity that exists, the fact that there are some things that are unique, are treated in a disproportionate way, and of course I've talked about the mascot issue. Native people are unquestionably the only people that are used in the way that we are for this mascot issue. And it's predominantly by white people. So when I talk about the fact that we aren't all in this together, look, when I go, again, having gone back to my old high school and then seeing these white guys get up there and talk about being Indians and almost looking at you like, no, I'm the Indian, not you. Of course, I'm not crazy about that word, and I don't claim that word anyway. But my point is that this is the amount of identity theft that exists. And again, Native people experience this in ways that nobody else does. And of course, it isn't just Native people that you would think of right off the top. I think about even what people who are identified as Latina or Latino or Latinx or Hispanic. Look at how their identities have been stolen. Look, if they're brown people, they're indigenous. And yet, merely because of speaking Spanish, they get, which is an indoctrination and an assimilation, an oppression. Merely because of that, they get labeled something else that defies their own ancestry, defies their own history. And we all struggle with it. And that includes me, because look, I've got caught a few times because, a few times I've tried to, utilize what I thought was the most appropriate word and maybe it's my own fault for thinking that I have to distinguish between Spanish-speaking indigenous people and English-speaking indigenous people. And there shouldn't be. I mean, look, I realize that along with the Spanish came Catholicism and church and all that other stuff. But all the English-speaking Native people went through that same stuff too. So none of this stuff is handled in a way that is fair to our ancestry. So it gets, again, we talk about education. My grandson joined me on the last program to talk about how Native issues, now Native history, how Native people are taught in school. And it's like most of it is devoid of any reality. And again, it fits right in with the whole mascot thing, because like even when people are teaching about Native people, they grab a snapshot in time, this small little window where they can say, that's what a Native person was. Not is, was. There are still people, I mean, one of the problems I have with the word indigenous, even though I've got it on my head here, I think that's a hat, is that in many ways that word is framed to mean the people who are descendants of the original people. And look, while I am a descendant, I am those people. I mean, and so the whole idea, I'm not trying to deny my ancestry, but to suggest that I am only a descendant of that, or I'm of Native descent. No, I'm Native. But see, this is how things get framed differently. And part of it has to do with the imposition of language, the eradication of language. And make no mistake about it, our language didn't just fade away all by itself. It was taken. It was taken away. There were policies that were, that insisted that we give up our language. And again, whether it was giving it up to Spanish or giving it up to English. Children were punished. And I don't mean just punished because they, got scolded or sat in the corner. I mean beaten and abused and died. And we talk about residential schools, but if you look at what the Spanish-speaking indigenous people went through at the hands of all these Catholic missions run by priests, some of the most abusive people in the history of the planet. So the amount of death that came at the hands of like Junipero Serra, who this recent pope made into a saint. I mean, the amount of death that was at the hands of churches and government. It is not an exaggeration when we call it a genocide. It's not. And as I've said many times over, genocide isn't just about killing people. Genocide is about eliminating a people by creating the conditions that their culture and their identity, their distinction will cease to exist. One of the ways to do that, language is a good place to start. And so that's why they did it. That's why they destroyed so much language. It was very, very difficult for us to maintain our languages. And the fact that we did in any way, at any level, is an incredible testament to the people who came before us. And of course, at some point, even our own people start to think, man, I know how our people are treated for speaking our own languages. So our own people get to the place where we start to wonder, does it make sense to teach my children this? My father, his first language was Ma, Gonyageha. My generation, all of my cousins none of my cousins were taught the language in the home. All of my aunts and uncles spoke it. Grandparents all spoke it, but none of my generation. So that becomes a conscious decision, and part of that is their own sense for the liability that came with maintaining some of that distinction. And I'm not saying there wasn't some effort to keep some of it, keep some of that distinction. Obviously, we didn't. The color of our skin is one of those things that's hard to change. But it's funny. We all gave the names. We all gave the quote unquote Indian names, even as we didn't have the language passed on. It's kind of incredible. It's incredible in many different ways. But I think it's really important that people realize that institutions like schools, like the education systems in the United States and Canada and South America, they were all geared towards eradicating that native distinction. And so we end up with a couple of problems. One, what we are taught and what we aren't taught. But there's also a self-esteem issue. When you realize that everything that you're taught suggests that white people got it all right. That they were the champions of everything. Everything that's good in the world came from white people. And of course, that's not true. And in fact, most of the evils of the world we could argue came from white people. And I'm not just talking about Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini. I'm not even talking about those individuals. It came at the hands of individuals whose names we will never know because of the atrocities that took place. So whether you were a plantation owner or just a guy who abused the slaves, or whether you were some decision maker down in Washington, or whether you were the priests and the nuns who ran the residential schools that the government paid for. Look, some of the things that were done to our people, it defies any sense of decency that anybody could consider. And that's why I say today, when I hear, and again, I find it very frustrating when I hear Native people say, well, we have to stop the hate, and we just have to love each other more, and we need to be prayerful, and we have to remember that we're all in this together. And I'm thinking, no, we really aren't. We really aren't. We're still in a situation where the heaviest burdens are placed on the people with the most limited resources. The people who are less equipped to carry those burdens are the ones who are burdened even more. I mean, it's not a coincidence that there was this analogy to being a beast of burden and being a pagan. By pagan I mean that you didn't follow the white man's religion that they stole from brown people, by the way. But no, it's not a coincidence, because we are still the beasts of burden. The bottom line is, all of the wealth that accumulates in that 1%, yes, sure, some of it, comes from generational, wealth, but that wealth goes away if it's not replenished. And we're the ones replenishing it. We're replenishing it with our labor. We're replenishing it with our consumption. And when I mean consumption, I mean with the fact that when money comes to us, it leaves us immediately. And so, and of course, we become victims of every marketing campaign, every big box store, everything that we're convinced that we need. And of course, there's a lot of pressure that comes in with the societal pressures. Look, I know how impoverished people are treated. I know how we are looked down upon. And so when I see some of our people, as I said earlier, trying to flash their $300 sneakers, or the new cars or whatever else, even though when you go to their homes, you realize what poverty people are really living in. But just for that moment, just for that one visual effect, we try not to be the poorest people on the planet. And some people can't even have that. And so that's why I say, for the next person who stands in front of a microphone, in front of a camera, and says, we're all in this together, I want you to slip on a pair of shoes from somebody who's actually lived in poverty. I want you to think for a moment what that life must be. The show that I heard today that talked about these homes where the raw sewage is just running, running across their yards. Why? Because there's no infrastructure for the most impoverished people. Look, I have the time, I know that there are places, and I've been to some of these places, where the homes, they're places that you can't step because you might break through the floor. I mean, these mobile homes and modular homes and these FEMA trailers and this kind of stuff that end up not being just temporary housing for somebody. For years, that's what used to go out to Indian country. These old FEMA trailers, or trailers that FEMA was acquired, even if they weren't new, they'd end up on going to a native territory. And those things aren't designed to last 20 years. Forget about 30 or 40 years. So we find ourselves in these untenable situations where we're trying to eke out a life with some level of dignity. And it's not always easy. Oftentimes we have to sacrifice something. We have to sacrifice, perhaps some part of a healthy lifestyle so we can have that moment that we can forget for that moment that we're impoverished. And that's where substance abuse comes in. That's where depression comes in. All of the mental health issues that people face. Because I got to tell you, I mean, I always find it difficult to, to listen to these talking heads. And I'm not just talking about the news people. I mean the people who make the news. I mean, I'm talking about the politicians. I'm talking about these people who stand up and speak on behalf of other people. And I'm thinking, do you really speak for somebody? I mean, because I don't see it that way. I don't see people speaking on behalf of the real needs of other people. And when they do, I mean, it's kind of like when you're watching one of those nature shows and you see, some animal really, really struggling, because they're dying of thirst or starvation or whatever else. And I'm thinking, man, you had all these cameras there, you had all these people there. Why didn't somebody just, throw the animal a chicken nugget or something to eat or something like that? I mean, it's like, no, we're capturing this raw footage. We're gonna show the real agony of life. And then I look at some of our lives, and there are people all around us, and there are photojournalists that will go into a native territory and show the poverty, but they're not suffering from that poverty. And who's consuming these shows? Who's consuming this video footage and these great documentaries? It's not the people who they're documenting. It's other people who, in many ways, perhaps what they're seeing is, well, this is how bad life can get. I'm not going to let myself get there. And yet, they're going to say, we're all in this together. And we're not. And I think that's, I know I've said it multiple times through this program, because that just hearing that expression just kind of, it stung. It stung to hear somebody say that when they've never lived a life of struggle. Look, and I know that wealthy people struggle with depression. Wealthy people struggle with substance abuse, and they struggle with, but that's almost because of their affluence. But when I see a Native person or a Black person or some other person of color who has never had a fair shot, never had an opportunity to get comfortable and stay comfortable for any extended period of time. Look, there are native territories that they're just incredible. I've lived on a few. And look, have things improved? Yeah, they have. But even as we do things to improve, even as we develop industries, whether it's the sale of tobacco or gas or getting involved in gaming, we have to constantly fight for everything that we get a hold of. We've had to fight policies in Washington. We've had to fight, to do different kinds of sales, and we're fighting against the tax man in Albany. We're fighting against the tax man in Washington. We're fighting against the Internal Revenue Service. We're fighting against, everybody who is so hell-bent on keeping us in our place. And that place is a spot on a social scale, on an economic scale. It's not just the geography. Look, we could develop economically in many of our territories and have some level of success. But it's policy that makes this success impossible. And then we'll hear, presidents or prime ministers talking about, oh yeah, we're going to make sure that we provide consultation to our natives. I always like the way they say that, the natives of Canada or of the United States, and that "of" has this like possession, overtone to it. It's funny because in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, it doesn't say anything about consultation. It says consent. It says that there needs to be free, prior, and informed consent, not just have a meeting with them. Let them know what you're going to do to them before you do it to them. That's what consultation is. And then those don't even happen. When I think about half the stuff, look, a lot of stuff happened even during the Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration, where they never fulfilled their commitment to have consultation. Forget about things like consent. This is the challenge that we have. So, I mean, even as Native people, we aren't all at the same place. And for any of us who have been able to find some level of comfort, if we're not advocating for the people who are still struggling, then shame on us. Because while we're not all the same, I mean, and I know I was just listening to a conversation about, self-determination today. Self-determination isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. What one people may determine is what's required for their self-determination might be different from territory to territory, from region to region. Geography has a lot to do with it. Because our lifestyles have changed. We used to be able to, migrate across our own mother, so to speak, to make sure that we didn't have to endure harsh winters, or we could go where the food was. Look, we weren't nomads. I mean, any more than the folks who winter in Florida, the affluent who winter in Florida and Arizona, they're not nomads either. They know exactly where they're going. But our lives have been completely disrupted. So whatever this small little postage stamp size of property is that we've been able to hang on to against incredible odds, we're struggling to maintain a life there. We're struggling for survival. Oftentimes, dignity is down the list because survival is what we're trying for. And for those moments that we can hold our head up, we do. But we're not all in this together. Not by any stretch of the imagination. There are people who are carrying the heaviest burdens. And the crazy part is, if you look at the economic scales in the US and Canada, there are more people that are falling from that middle down to the bottom every day. Because the wealthy people aren't falling to the middle class. The wealthy people are getting richer. It's everybody else that's dropping. And that's why the average income, the mean income, as they say, we can look at those averages all you want, but that doesn't tell the story. It doesn't tell the story because if you're not going to understand the extreme levels of wealth, then you'll never understand the extreme levels of poverty. And that's where most people of color find a big part of their population, struggling at the very, very bottom of the economic scales. So what I need from somebody isn't just some sort of lip service that says, "Oh, we're with you. We got your back. We're gonna march with you in a Black Lives Matter protest," because that's not enough. Like I said, when we talk about racism, it's not enough to say that you're not racist. If you're not fighting to end racism, if you're not an anti-racist, I mean, there's this, this movement that I've been a part of called the Poor People's Campaign, but even that doesn't address things in the way different people are impacted by poverty and the solutions. Everybody thinks that the solution to poverty is money. No, it isn't. The solution to poverty is opportunity. And that's what we're missing. That's what we're missing across our territories. That's what most people of color are missing. Because you can't measure the decision-making process that somebody makes when they live in the inner city ghettos, of an urban environment, or in the remote places of a destitute native territory. You can't make a judgment about the decisions that people make when they are struggling for survival. You're not in that situation. So your ability to judge the decisions and the choices that people make who are making desperate choices is never going to be a fair judgment. And why is that? Because we are not all in this together. I want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. This is John Kane. Yahweh.